Stay modern and stay up to date. Maybe you've heard that in the recent past. Maybe it was a memo from the board. Maybe it was some of your team leaders who told you to do so, or to listen to one of the amazing motivational, inspirational speeches. And when you now think, it sounds slightly ironic. Yes, not only slightly, because today we're going to talk about staying up to date and staying modern in today's times. Because I received a rising number of emails, and this now is a topic which came up again and again. So this is not a topic which came up last week. Pretty much since I began this podcast, people kept on emailing me, not only about the younger generation, but also about a very specific topic. And the very specific topic, and this topic is not the topic we are going to talk about, it's just one example for an ongoing problem in larger organizations. So I just give you the wrap up and the summary of what many people emailed me. Many people, many of them senior leaders, lots of experience, people who are great at what they're doing in the organization. And they say, we now get younger people and they join our workforce. And when we ask them, what do you do as soon as you leave the office? Many of them say, oh, I am part of, and then they talk about gaming and they are on some sort of server and they game with others. And then the conclusion of these emails always was, what a waste of time. Why don't they invest in their own education? Why don't they get additional education? That pays off way better. Gaming will not pay the bills. And that line is not only completely wrong, of course you have to see it in a certain context, but it also shows a certain attitude. So let's just compare industries. Let's just say I want to challenge the German car industry. And now you will say that's impossible because it might be the most important industry in whole Germany. And indeed it is very important. The car industry in Germany is worth about 80 billion euros. It was 50 billion euros after the crisis 2008. So in the year 2009, it was 50 billion euros. But let's say we are hovering between 50 to 80 billion euros. So how do you even want to get close to that with an industry like gaming, which is just a couple of years old? Because we all know that online gaming just became famous a couple of years ago due to the widely accessible broadband access we have now. So how can any industry like gaming be relevant? And normally you don't hear about gaming. You don't have friends when you are, many of you from a certain age. I don't want to say that you're old or outdated. That's not the core message. But many of you will not have friends who do gaming. And here are the numbers. So video games only, and I still try to challenge the German car industry. 3.5 billion euros are video games only. And by the way, the name video games, the term video games already is not really what they say today. 1 billion is only the hardware. So 3.5 and 4.5 billion, so 3.5 plus 1, 4.5 billion only for video games and hardware. If we now add so-called in-game purchases, microtransactions, if you now say, I don't really know what that is, no problem, I didn't know either. That simply means someone gets a game either for free or they pay a very small amount, and inside the game, they are now able to purchase something, for example, to get another item or to get something built quicker within the game. So people pay inside the game to accomplish something quicker. So when we own it, by the way, when people now wonder, where do these numbers come from? It's Statista. Statista is the official website where economical data from the Federal Republic of Germany is recorded. So that source is 100% reliable. Taking this together, 3.5 billion video games plus 1 billion hardware adds up to 4.5 billion, plus 2 billion for in-game purchases adds up to 6.5 billion. And when we now say we're hovering between 50 and 80 billion with the car industry, so let's just say we end up with something like 65 in average, we can say 10% of the German car industry is now gaming. The only difference is that the car industry is decades and decades and decades old, survived world wars and whatnot, and gaming is basically just a couple of years old, and already 10% of the market capitalization and economic relevance compared to the car industry in the Federal Republic of Germany. Interested now? Good. So listen from here, please. What is the problem when we react in a certain way as leaders towards younger people? So what do? We normally do certain we normally do certain derivations. So we derive something we know, which our experience is, into something we see right now. And by the way, I did exactly the same. I come from a generation where video gaming became hugely popular. I had a Nintendo Entertainment System, one of the very first ones. Then I had a Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, etc., etc. I had an Amiga, then my personal computer. But video games, the gaming industry back in the days was a hobby. So you purchased video games, you paid a lot of money for them, parents were okay as long as school was going well, and they said, well, it's a hobby and hobbies cost money, so that's okay. So still, it was impossible to make money from it. It was not possible to make money from gaming. And when you now only look at websites like Twitch, by the way, when you don't know what Twitch is, that already is part of the problem. We have to look into young people's worlds. And by the way, young people's worlds does not mean someone has to be young by age. It's about what people do in their free and spare time. So Twitch is a game streaming platform. People play video games and you can watch them playing these games. Sounds weird? I thought the same. It is strangely addictive once you got started and you found a video game which you find very interesting. So basically you can watch other people stream and they pay for that. I am now, when I'm recording this, I just left a 2-hour stream where I watched someone playing a video game, and this man had 5,500 people watching him. These 5,500 people paid €5 each, adding up to 25,000 euros per month for watching you gaming. And now think about what you thought is a waste of time. And by the way, this data is not even a part of the 6.5 billion I mentioned, because all the events, the streaming, this is all on top. So most likely gaming already way surpassed 10% of the value of the car industry, depending on which source you look at. If you look into a report, and I have to warn you, that's a report from the gaming industry, so it might be heavily biased, but they claim there is an overall market value, including events and all the championships, and where they fill football stadiums, etc., have professional teams, which we now have in the US, in Germany, professional gaming teams. So they claim they have a market value of 25 billion euros, an industry which is not even a decade old. So why do we do things still wrong, and how can we do better? The problem is we do derivations. I derive, and by the way, I did the same mistakes. I derived from my experience, which was gaming is a hobby. So I thought gaming is a hobby right now, and it doesn't add to your education. It doesn't add to your qualifications. So it is no way how you can make money. And by the way, that is plain wrong. Second, the focus we often have is focused on where do we come from. And now I'm quoting Simon Hazeldine, who I interviewed on this podcast as well. He's a sales expert, and he always says there are certain organizations, you enter their hall, when you enter their building, there's a huge painting, normally old man painted in black and white on their huge white beards, and then they say, it's our heritage. And Simon Hazeldine always asks, so what's the client's value of your heritage? And then it becomes very, very quiet in the seminar room. The reason for that is very simple. The reason for that is the heritage alone is of no client value. It has no client value. And I don't mean that experience is bad. Experience is a good thing, but a heritage by itself is of no value. Experience is, but a heritage can also be a burden. So problem number one is the derivation from old video gaming is a hobby. You can't make money with it, to the new is wrong. Second, if we focus on where do we come from, we will have wrong derivations as well. And the problem number three is that we simply deny to change it. So how can we do better? Step number one. So let's just say you sit in front of a younger person and they have a different opinion how they want to do something. Step number one, let them say what they want to say without a single interruption. Even when you sit there and you have a glass table scratching it and you think it is all plain wrong and your opinion is all nonsense, you are only listening, not saying a single word. Promise? Good. So first, listen instead of interrupting them. Aspect number two, when you now have a reasonable argument against what they claimed, bring it up. But you have to bring in reason, not just opinion. Don't tell them, oh, I'm in this industry for 20 years, it's not going to work. Because they say, oh, I have a new perspective, it is going to work. And then you simply play opinion versus opinion. So you really need reliable data. So bring in proper reasoning instead of just denying what they just said and just claim that they are wrong and you're right. So step number 1, listen, let them speak and don't interrupt them. Step number 2, bring in reasonable arguments. By the way, if you don't have any, that's the point where you simply have to listen even more. Step number 1, let them speak without interruption, and you listen. Step number 2, bring in reasonable arguments if you have some. And step number 3, the focus you must have is always on the value chain and value creation. Because I can tell you just one idea which young people always confirm is going to work. When they have an idea, you bring in, so first you listen, you let them speak and you listen. When you then bring in reasonable arguments against their ideas, and also you say at the end with the focus you have, there is simply no value for the client, there is no value for the organization, there is no value for the people, the department or anyone else. When you can prove that with reasonable arguments, young people will listen to you because you simply gave them the chance to make an idea, to show an idea, to propose an idea. And even when it didn't work, and even when you say we're not going to follow it up, as long as you bring it up with reasonable arguments and then you show them how the value chain works, they are still very appreciative and they appreciate to learn. And by the way, many ideas young people have, you will not have reasonable arguments against because they are already focusing on the value chain and they will bring in really good ideas to your organization. I wish you all the best implementing that in your organization. And for this week, there's only one thing from me left to say. Thank you very much for your time.